as noted and adopted by all Long Island Occupy groups. In the Declaration of the Occupancy of New York City, the one percenters, quote, control the media and use it to misinform and manipulate the public, end quote. We at Occupy News in solidarity strive to eliminate the plutocracy and all other injustices perpetrated upon the people, while assisting in the creation of true democracy here in the United States and elsewhere, bringing you the news and information that the mainstream won't. Welcome and thank you for joining us at Occupy News. I'm Jeff Block.
I'm Terry Schofield.
And I'm Charlie Lulay behind the camera.
Thank you, Charlie. We have for you this hilarious and informative 8-minute clip on why gas prices are so high. Nice to be able to laugh about that. You're going to love the graphics, by the way, put together by Long Island Press publisher Jed Morey.
Hello, America. I'm Jed Morey with an important public service message. In these troubled times, people all across our nation are asking themselves the same question. Why the f*** are gas prices so goddamn high?
Gasoline prices really doubled.
Well, there seems to be no shortage of explanations as to why this is happening. They range from trouble with Iran and growth in China to the stalled Keystone Pipeline and President Obama's energy policy. None of these, however, has anything to do with the price of oil. The story of high gasoline prices is best illustrated by describing the flow of oil and money through the intersection of Wall Street and K Street, and ultimately into the hands of a few mega corporations. But of all of the corporations involved in the complex pricing scheme behind oil, there's perhaps no company more influential than Morgan Stanley. Welcome to the Gospel According to Wall Street and the Book of Morgan. In 1999, Congress tore down the wall between commercial banks and investment banks and created Frankenbanks with unlimited access to capital. Over the next few years, 3 things happened that would change the face of commodities investing forever. The first was the formation of a new electronic trading exchange called the Intercontinental Exchange, known as the ICE. The second was a bill authored by then-Senator Phil Gramm that was signed by President Clinton in December of 2000. The bill, known as the Enron loophole, gave energy companies the ability to trade energy futures without federal oversight. We all know how that ended: rolling blackouts, energy price spikes, and the eventual collapse of Enron. Yet despite all of these calamitous events, nothing changed in the way energy was traded. In fact, things only got worse. The final piece of the puzzle came in 2006, when the Bush administration granted the ICE status as a foreign exchange, thereby exempting it from all U.S. regulations and eliminating transparency in trading. The net result? The ICE is now a billion-dollar exchange, handling 1/2 of the world's oil trading. When the ICE was formed in 2000, the commodities market was a small, highly specialized field with less than $10 billion in assets. Today, it's almost $450 billion. These were the moves that set the stage for one of the greatest scams of all time. And seated at the head of the table is Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley is one of the world's premier oil trading companies, which is why investors around the globe look to them to forecast the future pricing of oil. They're like the odds makers in Vegas, only this game is totally rigged. And to understand the con, all you have to do is follow the money. And in this case, the crude. Oil is pulled from the ground or the ocean and refined for our use. Then it's transported on vessels such as this one, owned by a company called Heidmar. Eventually, it finds its way to terminals, giant storage facilities like this one, owned by Transmontane. At this point, the oil is sold to more familiar companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron to be purchased by the consumer. Pretty simple. So simple that prior to 1999, volatility in oil pricing only occurred when there were major supply and demand issues, which were always based on real-world events like embargoes, industrial growth, or even revolutions. But none of these factors is present today. We're still in a global recession, demand is down, and we have a surplus of oil. And despite all of the provocations and saber-rattling with respect to Iran, oil is free-flowing around the globe. Now let's go back for a second and take a closer look at the supply chain of oil. Remember Heidmar, the oil freight company? Heidmar owns 120 massive oil tankers. It so happens that Heidmar is a wholly owned subsidiary of Morgan Stanley. And Transmontane, the terminal company that owns 1/3 of the oil terminals in the United States, also owned by Morgan Stanley. And if you happen to live in the Northeast, don't worry about ever running out of home heating oil, because Morgan Stanley owns the majority of the federally mandated reserve. But wait, there's more. Morgan Stanley also owns $900 million in Chevron shares and $1.2 billion in ExxonMobil. And that's just the oil. Now, let's follow the money. The 25-page single-spaced document attached to Morgan Stanley's year-end financial statements discloses every one of Morgan's subsidiary companies, including 207 corporations registered to the Cayman Islands. Since no one can actually see what goes on at these companies, there would be no way of tracking what exactly they're investing in. This means that the outside investors who rely on the advice of analysts at Morgan Stanley are likely competing with Morgan's own companies who have direct access to the analysts. In theory, Morgan Stanley could actually recommend buying or selling one way while investing another way, leaving outside investors holding the bag. Now, I know what you're thinking. A bank as reputable as Morgan Stanley would never bet against something they told their investors to buy, right? Right. Mortgage-backed securities. But wait, it gets even better. Thanks to the Enron loophole in George Bush's foreign status gift to the ICE, we can't really see anything that's happening on the exchange. The ICE has even been accused of allowing something called a round-trip trade, where a company takes the exact same position on either side of the trade, thereby eliminating risk and profit while increasing volume on the exchange. Seems strange considering an exchange makes money on fees, so the only winner in this scenario is the exchange. Which brings us to the coup de grace. Guess who's one of the founding members of the ICE? You got it. Morgan Stanley. Morgan, along with Goldman Sachs and BP, started and is still an owner of the ICE. Remember that the commodities market has grown from 10 to 450 billion in assets in little more than a decade. Pretty incredible growth, until you consider that the equity market is 36 trillion, the debt market is 82 trillion, and the derivatives market, a whopping $790 trillion. So what's the big deal, right? The big deal is that Morgan Stanley, and any company sophisticated enough to hide billions of trading dollars from U.S. regulators, can move the entire market without ever having to touch a drop of oil. To make matters worse, the Federal Reserve has been pumping dollars into the economy so money is cheap and buys less, making oil and gas even more expensive to the consumer. All of this is, of course, deeply troubling, and while $4 and $5 at the pump will hurt the overall economy, there are far greater consequences. Sustained periods of high oil pricing have a direct impact on food pricing. So much so that both the World Bank and the IMF have stated that speculation and manipulation in the commodities market are quite literally causing hunger and starvation. Shipping, storing, pumping, investing, and trading. Morgan Stanley is involved in every stage of the oil production and money-sucking process. It has more influence over the price of oil than any other corporation in the world. So the next time someone tries to explain to you why oil prices are so high, give them a little religion and convert them to the Book of Morgan.
Now here's a report on the third Long Island Occupy GA meeting, General Assembly. Terry?
Okay, so we met in Nassau County because the time before we had met in Suffolk, and of course we alternate counties to make it more accessible for everyone. Shannon from Occupy the East End facilitated. I represented Occupy Storefront and Occupy Shirley Mastic and took stack. Billionaire Brian from Occupy Babylon was the timekeeper, and the minutes came from Occupy Mineola's David. At the pre-meeting facilitation meeting, we set the agenda with report backs, proposals, announcements, soapbox, and then the time and date of the next meeting. On the report backs, Occupy Huntington shared with us that they're in the process of obtaining a barn for a barn raising show, and that the primary purpose is a fundraiser. I think Occupy Huntington folks might take issue with this version of the minutes, but that's what's here. The communications work group is represented by Dave, who explained briefly that some members of Occupy Long Island who participate in Occupy Wall Street in New York City have been sending information to be posted to the OccupyLongIsland.org website and then blasted out to the Facebook.com Occupy Long Island Facebook page, which is not to be confused with the group page, and we'll put that up for you at the end of this segment. Any requests to have Occupy Long Island information posted to OccupyLongIsland.org should go through the contact page on that site. Occupy Babylon reported that every Wednesday from 6 a.m. to 7:30 a.m., Occupy Babylon conducts a demonstration called War Free Wednesdays at the Babylon Railroad Station in front of the Liberty Cafe. Its purpose is to raise awareness to the growing and possibly imminent threat of a new war in Iran. Occupy Shirley Mastic merely reported that we're growing our weekly demos. Occupy Storefront reported that we have put in for our 501c3 and we are now able to accept tax-deductible contributions. We are still in the process of establishing Occupy Storefront that would be open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Occupy the Courts reported that they currently have Riverhead and Central Islip judges targeted for a civil disobedience action in June or July. They're merely waiting on Nassau County to identify their worst judge or judges on the issue that we've chosen, which of course we're not going to make public this broadcast because we don't want the judges targeted to take off sick on those days. Occupy the East End, which formerly was Occupy the Hamptons, of course does their protest every Sunday. 1 p.m. is their facilitation training and 2 p.m. is their general assembly. They're currently working on a star map. I believe a star map is a map of important and rich 1%ers in the area that can be targeted for a demonstration. They're also working on plans to target the 1% under a proposal called Shut Down Sag Harbor, which I'll share with you in a moment. Occupied Rowboat is planning to occupy the beach in Sag Harbor. Now, I love this. Free rowboat rides to all to raise awareness of the issues affecting the Hamptons, as well as raise awareness in the area regarding Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Port Jeff reported that they're still holding down the corner at the north end of Main Street and 25A across from the ferry every Saturday from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. The minutes say that the notes may be incomplete on this one, so I hope David didn't miss anything. And then we moved on to proposals. The first was the proposal for Occupy Long Island to join in War Free Wednesdays, as currently being done by Occupy Babylon, by occupying our local train stations during the morning rush hour to educate commuters around the concept of a war-free world and the imminent threat of war with Iran. There was a friendly amendment offered that materials to be used for this ongoing action should be available online in the future for other groups to use. That proposal was accepted on consensus. There was also a proposal local occupies pressure their elected officials to withdraw public money from banks labeled too big to fail and deposit them into local banks or credit unions. I believe by local banks they mean community banks. It's real easy. You just go to your local town hall, file a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain a list of banks that the town officials invest their town funds in. April is actually an excellent time to do this because for most of the towns, their fiscal year ends in April. So this is the perfect time to do it.
And hasn't this already been successfully done with
Yes,
some municipalities? So it's a
the-
movement in motion.
Right. The Freedom of Information Law request can be obtained online. You can request any and all information on public funds in banks. A response is required of your local town hall within a reasonable amount of time. That's typically 5 days. They have to either give you the information, give you a reasonable date by which they can supply the information, or give you a legitimate reason why they can't supply the information. But put in for it, eventually you'll get the information. If the funds are not with the too big to bail bank, what we're asking folks to do is push to have your municipality pass a resolution that your community will not do business with a bank labeled too big to fail in the future. That proposal was also agreed to on consensus. Next was the May Day direct action. Long Island should make its presence known on May 1st in New York City and fully support the general strike being called. Now, this is a day without the 99%. No work, no school, no shopping, and God, don't buy any gas. The suggestion was also made to withhold paying any bills on May 1st. Every Long Islander should carry a sign identifying themselves from Long Island. That proposal was also agreed to on consensus. Next was a proposal to shut down Sag Harbor on Saturday, July 14th, which incidentally is Woody Guthrie's birthday. What was proposed was an island-wide action with New York City to completely shut down Sag Harbor, where the 1% vacation. This would be a joint effort by Occupy Long Island and Occupy the East End. That proposal was also agreed to on consensus. The next proposal, and I should mention that because a lot of people didn't come to the facilitation meeting, and anybody who knows anything about Occupy knows that proposals are always brought forth to the GA at the facilitation meeting, vetted and clarified, and then put forth in the regular GA. For this GA only, the facilitation committee said that we would accept proposals at the GA itself that had not gone before the facilitation committee. The last proposal was a proposal to allow proposals to be brought to the Occupy Long Island General Assembly without being vetted in the facilitation meeting that occurs directly before the General Assembly. It would be limited to time-sensitive proposals, for instance, proposed actions in the next few weeks before the next General Assembly. It would also be limited to people who could not possibly attend the facilitation meeting directly before the GA. And we discussed the possibility that these last-minute proposals be submitted through email if GA attendees could not make the facilitation meeting. There was a very extensive discussion and debate, and because Occupy Long Island General Assembly had decided at its very first meeting that we would need either full consensus or 90%, that proposal was not agreed to on consensus. However, we did have a recommendation. This proposal should go back to a working group or think tank, and a compelling argument made as to why the GA would allow proposals into discussion without being vetted in a facilitation meeting. We do need to keep in mind that facilitation meetings are conducted prior to a GA to establish an agenda and get attendees on stack, the very foundation of an organized, structured meeting. Furthermore, the Occupy Long Island GA is not a working group. Proposals that have been vetted in a local Occupy group or working group are more likely to be heard at the Occupy Long Island General Assembly and ultimately accepted. Proposals are not to be taken lightly as the GA's time is severely limited. Next, we did announcements. Pax Christi announced Long Island Annual Peace Award presentation, Saturday, April 21st, 2012, 10:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation, 48 Shelter Rock Road in Manhasset. And we're going to put up on the screen an email address for you if you're interested. Occupy Mineola and New York Communities for Change Move Your Money event. Those details are going to be provided. Then globaldaysoflistening.org is having a toll-free Skype conference call where you can actually listen in to callers talk to Afghan youth from around the world. So that was very exciting. Unfortunately, by that time the meeting was tabled at the end of the announcements, so we didn't have time for soapbox or to set the date and time of the next meeting. since the Occupy the East End, since all Occupy groups will be coming to Occupy the East End, that's going to be set at the Occupy the East End event that's coming up. So we'll let you know when and where that's going to be.
And if they want to read this again for themselves?
This is posted on the OccupyLongIsland.org webpage. And I believe there's 2 corrections posted as well.
Good, thank you for that. Here's a little story on the Occupy the East End, formerly known as Occupy the Hamptons.
Yes, this thing just blew up completely out of control, and it's great to see all of Long Island, Occupy Long Island, the various groups rallying behind Occupy the East End. Occupy the East End to MoveOn.org. We will not be hijacked. We had been silent. We had hoped that the organizations that are attempting to co-opt and dilute the Occupy Wall Street movement would stop. The Occupy movements across the country are fighting for better lives of the 99% of Americans who work for a living. We had hoped that these interlopers would recognize that what they are doing is wrong, but they have not done the right thing. Now it's time to speak out and fight back. A Democratic Party-affiliated organization, MoveOn.org, is actively attempting to hijack the Occupy Wall Street movement. This brazen co-option attempt began by mimicking the Occupy movement's terminology and rhetoric, not to embrace it, but to channel our movement's energies toward backing Democratic candidates and policies. MoveOn says, MoveOn stands in solidarity with the brave protesters at Occupy Wall Street, but we're not Occupy Wall Street, and no, we're not trying to become Occupy Wall Street. If that's true, well, you know, if that's true, then why are they posting articles like which corporations occupy Congress and sponsoring events with titles like We Are the 99%? Folks, this is astroturfing at its worst. MoveOn.org is creating confusion on purpose. And by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with the term astroturfing, it's the creation of lobbying groups that appear to be separate from corporate interests, but are actually funded by them, as opposed to grassroots political activism. Ground Zero and MoveOn's takeover attempt of Occupy is focused on the eastern end of Long Island in New York. Occupy the East End represents the Occupy Wall Street movement in the Hamptons and Shelter Island, which happen to be the most popular summer playground of the 1%. In its most recent attempt to co-opt our movement is by scheduling a 99% spring training by a MoveOn front group called 99 Spring on April 15, 2012, at the same location and time where Occupy the East End has been holding its General Assembly since the group formed in October of 2011. Sorry, I get so annoyed when I talk about this. Excuse me. What's interesting about this is that Occupy the East End delivered an unprecedented unanimous block. Every Occupy the East End member at their GA issued a personal block to a MoveOn representative who asked Occupy the East End to participate, after MoveOn had already scheduled the event. The MoveOn rep refused to change the date or time and informed Occupy the East End that, quote, you will be taken over by MoveOn whether you like it or not. And by the way, folks, they have a video of that, which we'll probably be posting in the coming weeks. MoveOn.org is a political lobbying organization that routinely backs Democratic candidates and was originally funded by the billionaire George Soros. MoveOn.org is considered the lead lobbying group for Obama's re-election campaign and has overt ties to various Wall Street entities. Occupy the East End is in no way affiliated with MoveOn.org, nor does it wish to become so. The attempt to take over Occupy the East End is a hostile takeover attempt to capitalize on the Occupy movement as a whole. Occupy Wall Street and Occupy the East End as a movement rejects the political system as a broken structure that needs to be overhauled from the bottom up. Occupy the East End urgently requests the support of all occupations and occupiers to rebuff this attempt to co-opt our movement. All occupiers are asked to join us at the Windmill on Long Wharf in Sag Harbor on Sunday at 12:30 p.m. to make your voice heard at the General Assembly of the real Occupy movement. I think this is a particularly important story because Occupy the East End, formerly known as Occupy the Hamptons, was one of the earliest groups on Long Island. They have been in operation since October of 2011 at that location and at that time. And so I certainly intend, and as do the people in both of the Occupy groups that I work with on a weekly basis, and we will be going to Sag Harbor on Sunday to support Occupy the East End.
This concludes this week's Occupy News, which is brought to you by Occupy Storefront. Our mission statement is to recruit, educate, train, cultivate, mentor, and mobilize a cadre of citizen activists by providing a brick-and-mortar, centrally located storefront, easily accessible by public transportation, available to all Occupy groups across Long Island and those sympathetic to the principles of solidarity, for the purpose of teach-ins, meetings, dispersing information, making signs and posters, and all other Occupy-related activities. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you'll join us again next week.